Hello, my name is Brandon Dringle. This is my Unit 7 scholarly activity for American History in April 2017. I apologize, I forget which term we're in. The course objective for this activity is to discuss noteworthy and important figure and or figures in American history in the time period that we've discussed. That is not a U.S. president. With that being said, I'm going to discuss and talk about Paul Revere. So, Paul Revere is obviously the subject matter today, and I'm just going to go through and talk about a lot of things that people probably don't know about Paul Revere. But we'll start out from the beginning. Paul Revere was born on January 1st, 1735. He was born in Boston, Massachusetts. What a lot of people don't know is his family actually came from France. I don't want to say a lot of people don't know that, but what a lot of people don't know is that his family fled the French Inquisition and immigrated to the U.S. or America, or the colonies at that point. His father was a silversmith and a copper engraver, and Paul Revere did follow in his footsteps growing up, and eventually actually had a very successful business. His shop produced a lot of different items, from silver to copper, and obviously the engravings and everything that goes with it. But over 5,000 items, at least according to things I've discovered through the internet and different research. Paul Revere did have 7 siblings. That's a lot of family members. He was educated in Boston, grew up in Boston. He was a Boston man in general. So if he was alive today, he'd probably be a Patriot fan, sadly. He married his first wife, Sarah Orne, in 1757, but she unfortunately did die in 1773, but they did have 8 children together. He did remarry a Rachel Walker in 1773, and also had another 8 children with her, so it was a very large family. In total, he had roughly 51 grandchildren. Fun interesting fact is through his marriages he was actually related to Abraham Lincoln, whose father was the cousin of his father was a cousin of 2 Revere's son-in-laws. Holy moly, that's a whole mouthful right there. He was a Mason, very much a political activist, very much involved in the Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 and the Townshend Acts of 1767, all things that we have actually learned about quite extensively and talked about. He molded a lot of different things with his business and did a lot of things with his business interest, including making church bells, copper engravings. He opened up his first copper mill after the Revolutionary War. He did fight during the 7 Years' War. He also was called into duty for the French and Indian War, and he served as a lieutenant in the military, often in the artillery regiments. He played a very prominent role in the events that followed the Boston Massacre. He aligned himself with Samuel Adams and John Adams politically, and was very actively involved with them through the rest of his life and through the uprising of and the up and coming risings of America and the colonies. So a lot of people know that he was an artist, that he was politically active, very involved in a lot of different things. And one of the things he got involved in was creating a number of political engravings which were pretty well publicized and served as political propaganda during that time period. Some of the things that you've seen in history, like for instance the engraving of the Boston Massacre, the bloody massacre perpetrated in King Street, as it's called, was an engraving that he himself commissioned and did. Also, the Boston Tea Party images that you saw, which also he was a part of. He did participate in the Boston Tea Party. He was dressed as a Mohawk Indian, as a matter of fact. In 1774, he began serving as a courier for the Massachusetts Committee of Correspondence. This is the same committee that submitted what is called the Suffolk County Resolves. This is the resolves that rejected the Intolerable Acts, and it was calling upon Americans to prepare for a British attack on the colonies. When that time came, everybody obviously knows about the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere in April 18th and 19th of 1775. He, along with two other messengers, actually were sent out to warn John Hancock and Samuel Adams of the movements that the British Army. Now, a lot of people said that, oh, it's the British are coming, and as it turns out, that probably wasn't accurate, because everybody still considered themselves British at that point. So it was probably more the Redcoats are coming or the rebels are coming, something along those lines. He did take a lot of risk of doing that. He was actually, and the horse, funny little side note, the horse he used that night was not even his own, it was a borrowed horse. Paul Revere was actually caught during that ride by British soldiers. But shortly after catching him, they had to free him because they heard gunshots and had to hurry towards the Lexington Meeting House, which, if you know what that means the Battle of Lexington and the Battle of Concord. That's where they were heading to, and had to release him to do that. Henry Longfellow wrote a poem about Paul Revere and his ride. And funny enough about it is that it's fairly inaccurate, actually, and according to some of the accounts from Paul Revere in history. But it was 2 by the village clock. Well, when he was writing in Concord, according to the poem. But according to Paul Revere himself, he claims that he never even made it to Concord because he got caught by the British. Ain't that something? Paul Revere did design one of the first seals of the United Colonies, as it were at that time, and also was part of designing and printing the first Continental bonds. And he stayed very active until his natural death in May 10th of 1818. He did die in his home in Boston, and he is buried at the Granary Burial Grounds in Boston, Massachusetts. So, some fun facts, a lot of little insight and little things you didn't know or did know about Paul Revere. He is and was a very influential man in a lot of different ways. So just kind of recap, but not even recap, but talk about a couple of the fun things about Paul Revere that a lot of people don't know or may not know or do know about Paul Revere. Because most people don't know, in the streets, if you were to talk to them, know only Paul Revere as the guy that did the Midnight Ride. But here's some fun little facts for you about Paul Revere that you may not have known, and if you do, awesome, you're pretty well informed. He was a silversmith by trade, but he was an amateur dentist. He dabbled in the dentistry world. He was really well known for his art. He helped lead a spy ring. Now, depending on who you talk to and depending where you look on the internet, so none of this, I'm not going to corroborate any of this and say this is absolute fact. But History.com, which is where I would do some of my research from, does say that according to the CIA, of all people, Paul Revere founded the first Patriot Intelligence Network. It was a Boston-based group, and they called themselves the Mechanics. He had always been a member prior to the revolution to the Sons of Liberty. who were big against, incendiary taxes and stamp tax and all these different things that required taxes. Well, in 1774, the mechanics came to be, and they spied on British soldiers and a lot of the regulars around in order to keep inside information and help the revolution kick up and have the best chances of success, which is pretty interesting. We discussed a little bit about how his poem was a little inaccurate, and it probably was. His quote was rather fabricated. His horse was borrowed, of all things. And one last little thing, even though he had lots of kids, he was a very successful businessman. He was in and out of the military a lot, but his military record was, from what I can tell, very less than stellar. But the short example is 4 years after his midnight ride, Paul Revere served as a commander of artillery units, and he didn't do so well at it. He failed to launch an attack in time, and not enough reinforcements were brought. It did require an American retreat. It was a whole show. It's in itself. He was also charged twice with cowardice and insubordination, which is funny because it took a lot of courage to do the midnight ride. But he was court-martialed and dismissed from the militia. To his defense, though, he was acquitted in 1782, but it was still a tarnish on his overall legacy. So hopefully you learned something new and some basics and a little bit more about Paul Revere. He was one of the very important figures in American history, and a lot of different things probably couldn't have happened without some of the early things that he did very early on in his career and his life. Thank you.